Hi there, COMM 362 folks. This is Dr. Swanson. I want to give you some additional feedback on the news release assignment, particularly the draft news release assignment. Let me say right off the bat, this is probably the first time you guys have ever done this. So I give you a lot of pat on the back. I give you a lot of congratulations. Thank you for doing this. To the extent that news release writing is really difficult, because this is the optimum opportunity for you to balance strategy and creativity, or what we refer to in this class as the craft and the art. Creativity being the art and strategy being the craft. You're balancing those two things, and it's hard to do in a one-page document. And so take this as your first step in this process, because ultimately, if you can write a news release well, you can write anything well in public relations. The news release is the keystone of all of the writing tasks that we do. And in old masonry terms, a keystone is the stone that holds everything together. You pull the keystone out and the building falls apart. So in that sense, this is really challenging, and I understand, and I want to be here to help you every step of the way. So here's some feedback for you. First, think about what the news release looks like visually. Now, we've got examples in the book. We've got examples here. The announcement news release on page 106. Now, the book divides news releases up into multiple chapters. There's like feature news releases and announcement news releases, and I don't want to get that complicated. I'm looking for just a basic one-page news release that takes a set of facts and turns this into a potentially newsworthy story. We have a very potentially newsworthy story here. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But think about what the news release looks like on the screen. We all read from top to bottom. We tend to read from left to right and in a kind of a Z pattern, where when we get something we're seeing for the first time, we kind of look at it this way, and we go down this way, and we go back this way. The news release has to look professional on the screen. It doesn't matter whether this news release is coming on paper, by fax, in a PDF, an email, doesn't matter. That news release document has to look professional. It's got to have the client's name up at the top, big and bold, because the first question the gatekeeper has is, where is this coming from? The second question they have is, why does this matter to me? The third question they have is, how current is this? And I speak from experience, 30 years working in this business as a gatekeeper across multiple platforms. Those are the kinds of things gatekeepers look for. And gatekeepers, they get news releases by the dozens, by the bagful. They get dozens of news releases every day, probably in many cases many more than that. So that news release that you send them, I mean, they will literally give it 2 or 3 seconds to tell whether or not it's worthwhile. And those questions are answered visually. If that 2 or 3 seconds shows this to be, I don't know what this is, or this doesn't make sense to me, gone, over, done. Doesn't matter what the news release said, it never had a chance. So the visual aspect is really important. Client name has to be up at the top and bold. The contact information for you, the contact person, needs to be up there, but your name does not go above the client's. You are not number one here. The client is number one. Your name and full contact information goes below that. We need street address, we need city, we need zip code, we need phone number, we need email address, we need all that contact information with your name below that. Okay, so that's the basics at the top, where that answers the question of who is sending this to me. Your news release needs a headline. It needs a headline like a news story. If your headline is like 2 lines long, blah, 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 they don't care. Gatekeepers don't care. They want to see quickly, what is this all about? So you've got to have a pithy headline, brief, that gets to the news value of this story. This is not entertainment. This is not sales. This is not, ooh, new ships, way. No, it's not any of that. This is news, and so it's got to be framed like news. The headline has to sound like news. The instructions call for an AP-style dateline at the beginning, and there's a particular thing with Chicago, so you're going to have to look it up. but I see date line errors in almost every date line that's used in this assignment, so you're going to have to look it up. The first paragraph of the news release gives the basics about what's going on here. Why is this news? That's what the first paragraph will address. Why is this news? And then you can get into the later details, after that. If your first paragraph says this company's been in business for 12 years and they're really excited to do these cruises, and isn't that really great, and you can have a cocktail too, and Lake Michigan is beautiful, and blah, 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 that's not news. Your news release is dead at this point because the gatekeeper won't read past the first paragraph. So remember from COMM 101 or your equivalent, the who, what, why, when, where, how, writing in an inverted pyramid style. Our book talks about all of that. So please read that material and study it and look at the examples in there. And get on the internet and look at some examples to see what an inverted pyramid structure is, because the facts that are lesser important go later. Okay, let me talk about news hook. News media gatekeepers are looking for an interesting story. The book talks about this too. What makes an interesting story? Novelty, something unusual, something very relevant in this community, something that's timely. Those are the kinds of things that make interesting stories. So what is the news hook for this story? What makes it an interesting story? Your news release might be going to television news producers. What is an interesting story that they could have video of? How about ships being built overseas that will end up in Chicago? Construction has begun, or something like that. Yeah, that's an interesting story because nobody else has ships like these. So the fact that these ships are being built in Scotland in sections, they'll be put on a 747 jet, they'll be flown to Indiana, then the sections will be reassembled to sail on Lake Michigan. That's an interesting story. You can see the pictures in your head that could result from this. So that's your news hook. It needs to be up high in the story. Not the first paragraph, because the first paragraph is just what grabs eyeballs, but under that first paragraph, because that's what allows the gatekeeper to see that there's news here. And then the details after that follow in the lesser order of importance. How many passengers the company had last year, that's important, but I wouldn't put it in the first or second paragraph. It doesn't matter up there. It goes down at the bottom. So look online. There's lots of places you could go online, or look in the book and learn about boilerplates, because at the end of this news release, you're going to have a boilerplate, and that's a paragraph that describes what this company is all about. And a lot of those lesser facts can go down there. Now, in this news release, you can include a quote. It would be interesting to have a quote in there. Think, what would the gatekeeper like to know that a quote could tell? Make it up. So, you're the general manager, you want to quote yourself? Fine, do that. You want to quote the owner of the company? Fine, you can do that. Put a quote in there. Don't put a quote that says, "We're really excited about these 2 new ships," because that's not a descriptive quote. That's a fact masquerading as a quote. On the other hand, you could have a quote where, let's say you put the name of the owner of the company in there, and the owner says, "These are the most unusual ships to ever be purchased by a Chicago company. We're really looking forward to having them on Lake Michigan." I don't know, something like that. It's like, wow, that's different, that's unusual. How do you structure the quote? Go to my common copy errors document. That shows you how to structure a quote, because you want to structure the quote so that it fits in with the story well in terms of how you attribute the quote to someone. Let's see, what else do I need to cover? I think that's about it on the basics. Now, I'm pausing here for a moment to collect myself. You are an aspiring public relations writer. Who gets to decide what content goes in the writing? You do. When you're presented with a fact set, who gets to decide what's important and what's not important? You do. Should all the facts from a fact set be dumped into a document? No. That's an editing decision. Who makes the editing decisions? You do. So, when a client gives you a fact set that has information in there that is not appropriate to to use in the document. Do you dump it into the document? No, you don't. This is where you have to think strategically and creatively as a public relations writer. Looking at that fact set, what should I include, what should I not, and how should I structure it in the item that I'm writing? Here's a hint. Throughout this class, I put mistakes in fact sets. Misspellings, typos. I put information in there that's not relevant to the story. Why do I do that? Well, I'm just an evil person. No, I do that because I'm training you to be a public relations writer, and I want to dump a little bit of crap in the fact set and see if you just dump that crap right into the document that you're working on. In this particular case, there's some information in there about a fatal crash or fatal accident. Do you want that in your news release? No. Did you know that California State University Fullerton was the site of one of the first mass shootings on a college campus in America? Happened in 1976. 8 people were murdered here. Now, part of the reason, if you didn't know that, part of the reason you didn't know that is because Cal State Fullerton doesn't announce that in every news release that it puts out. We have a new president. Yay! By the way, did you know we had a mass shooting on this campus in 1976? You'll never see a news release like that. Now, we're not trying to hide that, but it's not relevant. It's not relevant to anything going on right now. And the accident that this company had in the past, 17 years ago, is not relevant. 17 years? Yeah, 17 years ago, is not relevant to anything going on today. So if you took that accident information and you put it in your story, and then if you wrote something about safety fencing and we don't want people to drown and blah, 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 that's not strategic. That's not good public relations. And I don't mean to be critical, but let's be honest. You have to learn to be strategic. You have to learn to be a good public relations writer. And if you're just dumping stuff in there, or if you're building up something other than the story along with the story, you're going to be in for a world of hurt, because that's not the way things go. And honestly, based on my 30 years of experience, if this news release got to a gatekeeper and there was something in there about that accident 17 years ago, forget your story about the new ships. The gatekeeper is going to look up the history of that shooting. And what if they found out this was the 17th anniversary of that? Guess what? There would be a really ugly story in the newspaper tomorrow about the 17th anniversary of the shooting that you, or the accident that you just told them about. That is not strategic. That's not good public relations. That's not how we do it. So I don't want to go on and on about this thing. I'm looking for a short, simple news release with very strategic, common sense facts in it. So think about this. What are gatekeepers looking for? How do they expect it to look on the page? They want short sentences, one thought to each sentence. If you're writing a 40-word sentence that has 6 thoughts all mashed up in it, that's not going to work. The average American reads at a 6th grade level. If you're writing 30, 40-word sentences, that's not going to work. People cannot comprehend that. And so, simple news release, visually appropriate, simple facts, news hook that would draw in the gatekeeper, demonstrate why this is news. Don't make it sound like a travel brochure. That exclamation mark key on your keyboard, don't use it in public relations. Just don't. Because there's a great quote, and I wish I could remember who said it. Using an exclamation mark is like laughing at your own joke. It's just really out of place most of the time in what we do in public relations writing. So anyway, I could go on all day about this, but think simple and look for my written feedback, not only feedback to your assignment, but I'm going to post some other feedback generally about news releases. Please take some time with this. Please study this. Please practice on this news release as you transition it into the final copy. Don't wait until the day before the final copy is due and try to write it up, because you're going to miss stuff. Being a good public relations writer is like being a good musician. It takes time. It takes practice. Lady Gaga, did she get to be great overnight? No. Did she start practicing the day before the Super Bowl concert? No. I mean, hell, she jumped off the building. Okay, it was a camera trick. But she looked like she jumped off the building. And she does a lot of great stuff. She's a great actress. She's a great musician. She's tremendously talented. I guarantee you she's practicing all the time. And if you want to be a good public relations writer, you got to be practicing all the time. And you have to be reading good public relations copy all the time. If you're not following a blog, you need to. You need to be out there on the internet looking at good public relations copy, because that's how we get better. I welcome any questions you have about PR writing at any time. I'm here to help you. And sometimes, do I have to give you a little shoulder push on stuff? Yeah, I do. I do. And if you're one of the people who wrote about the accident in this news release, can't do that. Got to think strategic. Got to be creative. Got to be appropriate. All right. That's all for today. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'm here to help. Thank you.